So I've been at CCamp today. I don't know if you guys know what CCamp is, but it's sort of an incubator for startups. And I've been going to kind of events that are related to startups for 4, 5, 6 years. And something I saw on a really regular basis is you had lots of people getting up and talking about the power of technology. Very, very few people talking about the power of design. So this was sort of my response to the lack of design talk in the sort of the startup sphere. Might be preaching to converted a little bit to this audience, but please bear with me because hopefully you'll see at least some patterns or some discussions or some arguments you can use when you're talking to your sort of clients and startup partners. So when you're trying to create something that's new and never existed before, like this plans for Death Star, and it solves a particularly annoying problem, in this case the rebel scum, people tend really not to care how well designed it is. They just really want the problem to go away. And we can see this lack of concern for users in a lot of early products, like this electric hairdryer, or these set of hair curlers, which I'm actually in a museum in Zagreb. In the rush to market, unfortunately, a lot of these products contain critical flaws, like the hair curler's tendency to set their client's hair on fire. Not a good thing. The problem is, despite all these flaws, you'll always find a few early adopters, folks that will happily spend lots of time getting used to a new, frustrating interface, just because they want to solve the problem that it gives them. The problem is, if you're not careful, you can give companies a sense that they've hit the jackpot if lots of early adopters are using their products. The problem is that over time, less forgiving users will start to come in, and they'll start to run up to issues. They'll start to notice all the little problems you've got, like your product's ugly, like your product's confusing. And if you've ever tried to buy a train ticket on the subway in Japan, it's just impossible to use without asking somebody next to you for assistance. And if that happens, it's basically game over for your burgeoning startup. Because what will happen is, if you're not careful, someone will come along who's younger and smarter and faster than you and will do you out of business. Now, this is obviously like a funny joke. Yeah, there's a sort of a 7-year-old on a computer. I gave this talk about a year ago at a conference called the Next Web. They had 2 speakers of the age of 12, one of whom was the youngest CEO in the world. And they got up into a room of about 1,500 startup founders talking about what their mobile strategy was and what their business strategy is. And you could see the faces of all the 21-year-old entrepreneurs that thought they were young and kind of on the ball, looking at these 12-year-olds and going, oh my God, what's going on here? Because what will happen is these kids will come along and they'll try and make a version of your product that's smaller. They'll try and make a version of your product that's faster or powerful, or they'll just pack it full of lots of features. One of the reasons, actually, I'm kind of fascinated by internet fridges, a little bit of a side. The only reason I think internet fridges existing is because the cost of flat panel screens and Wi-Fi cards has come so cheap that actually it's almost like, in comparison to the cost of a fridge, which might cost £1,000, sticking a 50 quid flat panel display on it just seems to make sense. It's kind of like when you were, when I was growing up in the 80s, everything had a little digital clock on it. Don't know why. I've got no idea why you'd want a pen with a digital clock. It was just that it was so cheap, you may as well, just stick it in. The problem is, this thing that when I was like 8 was a must-have thing. I wanted this digital pen. Very, very quickly, it becomes boring. It becomes a commodity. People start giving it away for free. And if you're not careful, that will happen to your product, your startup. Because what will happen is you'll become a commodity. You'll become a manufacturer, not an innovator. And sadly, this is the point where most companies actually start to wake up and care about design, when they've kind of lost the technical advantage and they're trying to scrabble around in the marketplace to wonder why all of their clients are flocking to the next new hot, sexy product. So you suddenly find that design starts to become important only over time. Part of this is down to consumer demand. Part of this is down to design trends. There's lots of reasons why this is. And what I'm showing you now is effectively 100 years evolution of those 2 products I showed at the start, the hairdryer and the curlers. The difficulty is in the digital space, you don't have 100 years to do this. You have at most 3 or 4. So you've got to somehow cram in 3 or 4 years, 100 years worth of innovation, which is really, really hard. So obviously when most people think about design, and I know this is not what you guys are like, but even today at CCamp, talking to some of these founders, a lot of them really struggle to understand that design was more than the surface image. And that's okay, because the surface image is important. The surface image creates desire, builds desire, and it can set you apart from competitors. A good example of this is Beats by Dre. Beats came into a highly commoditized market where there were thousands of suppliers, no one had dominance, and through the power of really good industrial design alone, they kind of ended up in 18 months owning the lion's share of that market. The interesting thing I think is this is actually based on a product that might look nice, but most audiophiles would say is technically inferior. And I see this a lot in startups where I see a lot of startups that think they've got the best technology, but actually no one really cares about the technology as much as they care about the user experience and the branding and what it means. Now obviously I'm not just arguing for style over substance, because then you end up with something like this, the Juicy Salif. A beautiful piece of artwork, a really shit juicer. If you ever try to use it, it gets more juice on the counter and on your hands than it does actually in the glass. Even though in a lot of places this appears in design museums as a beautiful piece of design. I think they're missing the point. I think what happens is when clients come to you asking for a new product, this is what they're seeing. You're getting a client that knows their market and knows their needs so inside out that they know every single little nuance and they want to get the exact experience in. And this is fine. If you're into race car driving, maybe if you're a race car driver, you want something like this. But if you want to actually engage to a new level of consumers, you want to try and, they'll feel intimidated by this level of complexity. And really what you want to give them is something like this. So I believe good design brings the ability to simplify, to ditch that which is confusing or unnecessary and focus on the core of the product. And by doing so, you can help cross the chasm in startup speak and reach the mainstream audience. Now, to do this, and no matter how brilliant a designer you are, you have to put this stuff in the hand of your users, because however smart you are, on the drawing board, you'll never experience or expect people to use your products like this. Which is why I'm a massive advocate of this idea of designing an obsessive level of understanding for your users. And we do this obviously one way through usability or user experience design. And if you're not sold, obviously I'm not going to sort of go into Dieter Ramsey's 10 principles of design, but I think these are still incredibly valid, and an exercise we do a lot with our clients is to create a set of design principles for their product, the kind of like the pillars of how the product's going to behave. And one of the useful elements of having a set of design goals is when it comes time to review the product, it stops being about aesthetics or surface level stuff, and you review them in the context of a set of design goals. This is a very famous sort of list of stuff, so you can find it on Wikipedia under Dieter Rams. See, I think that good design is more like a detective story. It involves building up a picture of all the evidence, sticking it on a wall, profiling it. Good designers are like the people from The Bridge or The Wire. Usually they don't know what the solution is until the very last episode, but they nail it, they get it really well because they build up that picture. The bad designers are like the bad cops, the ones that think they know who did it in episode 1 and go around and sort of nail the person, and you know that they've got the wrong suspect. And I see a lot of that in design. I see a lot of people rushing to the solution without having that kind of big vision picture. So I think if you're a good designer, your workspace needs to look like this. Your workspace needs to look like a crime's been committed, because that's effectively what you're doing. And if you're looking at your designers and your design team and they're not surrounded by stuff, they're not bathing in stuff, I think they're doing it wrong. And I think it's worth sort of bearing that in mind. Now, designers have got lots of really useful tools. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Kano model. The Kano model is one that I really like. And it's one that I think gets over, for me, some of the humps and the problems with the idea of lean and MVP. So again, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Kano model. I just run through it quickly. Basically, there's this idea that there's a certain basic level of features that you have to give people, or else the product doesn't make sense. So I'm staying in a hotel. I expect a bed. Now, if I get into a hotel room and there is a bed, I'm not going to go, wow, there's a bed. These people really, really get me. It's just something that has to go in there. Then you get these sort of performance payoff things where the more of it you give, the better it is. So, it used to be the case that when Google were, giving you more hard drive space on Gmail, it was like, for every gigabyte, you got a little bit happier. The problem is that over time, that extra space starts to become meaningless. And what used to be a performance payout feature just becomes a basic expectation. Now we all expect unlimited storage. It's kind of like when you're staying in a hotel and one hotel room has a small TV, the next one has a big TV, one has a massive plasma. You feel like the big one is really good until, frankly, everyone does it and then you don't feel special. The thing that I love are the exciters, the little small touches that give you that little thrill that someone cares about you. Like waking up on a cold, wintry morning and seeing a little kind of what you think is a trademark thing on the bottom of a piece of juice, and it actually says, "Stop looking at my bottom." Now, this is not the kind of thing that you would find in a backlog. This is not the kind of thing you would find in your MVP. This is the kind of thing that you need designers to fight for, to bring desire, to bring delight into your products. But it's really, really difficult to judge and really, really difficult to fight for in the face of product managers throwing constant feature requests. And how do you fight for something small and delightful when you've got someone saying, hey, but if we add this extra feature, it will get us X users? So it's really important for us to do this. I think some customers nail it. I think the guys at MailChimp do a really beautiful job. We've got Aaron Walters from MailChimp coming and speaking at our UX London conference in a few months' time, and he's going to be talking all about the kind of the design philosophy and some of the sort of playful and sort of joyous sort of elements they try and build into their design. It's really interesting. I'm very much a subscriber of Seth Godin. I was very lucky to see him speak at Brooklyn Beta a couple of years ago. So I always try and squeeze a Seth Godin quote into my talks. Seth talks about this idea that your best marketing is actually your product. And so you should, rather than build an average product and then spend a huge amount of money marketing it, you build an amazing product and it markets itself. And I know that's a very simplistic way and it's not necessarily how everything goes, but I just see so many companies doing that, building average products and then spending lots of marketing. You see it in Hollywood, people make a £500 million movie and then spend £500 million marketing it, when actually they'd have been better off spending a £10 million movie that was of good quality. In fact, this is what Dropbox did a few years back. Dropbox were paying, in cost per click, between $233 and $388 per user, and an average user's value to them was $100. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that that is not a long-term business strategy. It's great if you've got $100 million worth of VC investment. That's going to run out really quick. The guys at Dropbox realized that. They diverted all of their marketing spend into their product. They built a beautiful, delightful product that now is kind of just killing it. And this is really what we want to do. We want to create products that people love. And I think if you bring all these things together, if you bring the beautiful design, the great functionality, you just get these products that just sell and sell and sell themselves. Now, if you ever study anything about business, one of the first things you'll learn in MBA is the need to create a product that is defensible in the market. It used to be that technology was defensible. It used to be that if you had better technology, if you had faster servers, if you had better developers, that was your USP. That is no longer the case anymore. But I believe design is something that can make you unique. And good design is something that's really, really hard to copy. If you look at the famous German brothers that go around cloning websites from San Francisco startups, they do a reasonable good job, but you can smell the fake a mile off. It's the same if you go into a market in Thailand and you get a Gucci bag or something. You know it's not Gucci. You know it's fake and it's really obvious. So design is a key competitive advantage because it's difficult to copy. And it's difficult to get right. A lot of companies try. A lot of companies, for years, people like Nokia have been trying to produce better and better designs and failing. And I feel the frustration. I've spoken to lots of Nokia UX people who look at releases that Apple do and say, like, we thought of that in the labs 3, 4, 5 years ago. The thing is, they thought of it in the labs. And there was someone in middle management that was stopping these innovations getting through. And that's a huge problem. The huge problem with the middle management and not allowing these innovations to bubble up. And the frustration in these designers' faces where you're like, if only we'd done it right, we would have nailed it. It's a shame, and a lot of it is about culture. If you want to compete on design, You can't have a management or an accountancy culture. You have to have a design culture. And to do this, you need to have great designers. You need to have great designers at the core, not in the service of the marketing department or in the service of another department. They need to have a seat at the table. They need to be peers with the ability to have budget and shape the organisation. Problem is that most startups don't understand this. Most startups think a designer is a designer. So what they do in order to save money and save runway is they go onto Dribbble, they will find the cheapest Eastern European designer they could find, and they will task them with designing their problem, designing their startup. It makes sense. We can't blame them. If you've got limited budget and you know very little about design, and you see some beautiful screenshots on Dribbble, why not? Well, the problem is, you end up with something like this. You don't hire a designer, you hire a stylist. Does anyone know who this guy is? Hands up if you've ever seen this guy before. Oh God, you guys do not watch enough late night cable TV, trust me. This guy is from a TV show called Hair Battle Challenge. And they get stylists to create amazing hairdos, like this Eiffel Tower of hair. Honestly, if you see this TV show, it's hilarious. You won't be able to go to bed because it's a car crash happening right in front of you. But this is a problem. They're hiring stylists. They're not hiring designers. So even though you get a beautiful product, you get something like Colour that is beautiful but hollow. It's shallow. It has no soul. And this is the thing that kind of prompted me to kind of give this talk is, a lot of startups talk about their runway, their ability to kind of continue operating, the money sort of running out, the edge of the runway nearing and nearing. And a lot of people go, we'll get a cheap designer at the start, and then we'll hire a better one later on when we've built a great product. The problem is, and we had a couple of people who were like this, that every year we'd check in with them, we were mentoring, and every year they were really struggling because they hadn't nailed the design, and the money was running out, They started with a cheap designer, worked for a year, didn't nail the problem. A slightly more expensive designer, another year, still the same problems. And I was looking at this stuff and I was just thinking, if you'd have got a good team together, you would have nailed this problem in 6 months, you would have been to market in month 7, you'd be making money in month 8, and then you hire the cheap designers. You hire the stylists to take the core of the product and keep pushing and keep iterating it. But start with something good. So I really think you need to hire the best designers you can afford and then sort of go down from there. Because good designers are not just good stylists, they're design thinkers. They solve the really difficult challenges. And it's the difficult challenges that are affecting businesses. The bulk of our work, or at least the bulk of the really exciting work that we do, is up front. It's 6 weeks, 8 weeks working with a client before we've even done significant amounts of visual design, because we're solving the big problems. We're solving the problems around their business. And once you've solved their business problems, and once you've solved their user problems, the design almost kind of emerges naturally. It's like artists, particularly sculptors, will say, for their inspiration, I can't remember which sort of famous sculptor said it, but he was sort of sculpting away at his sort of giant block of marble. And when someone said, how do you get your ideas? It's like, well, I don't. I'm just freeing the statue that's in the block of marble. It's already there. You've just got to kind of let it out. Now, the good thing is this is starting to kind of sort of come to fruition. Because it's increasingly rare to find companies that are successful without good design, focusing purely on technology. Traditional companies, they focus on hiring a CTO. I think you need to hire a CXO, Chief Experience Officer, to help drive direction. Because having a design co-founder, I think, is becoming much more common and much more acceptable these days. And in fact, if you look at some of the biggest startup successes of late, a lot of them are designer-driven. Things like Airbnb, for instance, and a crowdfunding platform. My brain's not working at the moment, but yeah, lots of great designer Kickstarter. Lots of great designer-driven startups out there. Now, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and just say, I think the lean startup process is actually really good. I think it's a little bit of kind of something that a lot of designers have already known for a really long time, validating your business models, getting out there, talking to your customers. So it's really good that finally the business world is sort of waking up to the things that we've been talking about for a really long time. And I think it's great that there are organizations out there like Luxor who are now taking on startup teams and tech teams and teaching them the tools of user experience. The thing that I'm a little bit worried about by the lean startup movement is their fixation on metrics. And I see this all the time when I go to events like sort of C-Camp. It's almost like they're kind of worshipping these metrics, that somehow the metrics will tell them the design solution, that they don't need designers in the mix. And I kind of view this a little bit like sat-navs. I think metrics are like sat-navs. I wouldn't drive anywhere without sat-nav, basically because I'm not a very good driver and I don't really have a good sense of direction. So sat-navs are great. But if you set off in a car and you don't look out the window and you only look at your sat-nav, this is going to happen pretty bloody soon. This is a lorry driver who just turned down a tiny little street because he's following his sat-nav. You're going to crash within about 3 or 4 minutes. Sat-navs are a source of information and a really useful source of information, but they do not drive the design, they inform the design. You need designers, you need smart design thinkers to interpret those stats into something that's meaningful, useful, and actionable. So culture is really, really important. But again, design is a team sport. I see a lot of designers on the other side who feel really precious and don't let anyone else play with their tools. Design is something you don't do on your own. You do it as a group. And designers, I think, are more becoming facilitators. They're not having to do every design task. They're not having to do every design decision, but they're working with the team members to elicit and to embed this kind of design philosophy. And so, cheap joke, but I think there's no B team. You've got to bring your A team. You've got to have really great designers and work together. So like I say, Silicon Valley, waking up to the power of this stuff. And interestingly, this is a little bit old now, but 2 years ago, I had 2 friends of mine that both run design agencies in San Francisco that both got bought, one by Facebook, one by Twitter. And they were bought as an acqui-hire. I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of acqui-hires, but basically it was getting so hard to buy tech talent in San Francisco that effectively every developer in a company, in a startup, was valued at $2 million US. So Google would go and look at a company of 10 people, 10 really good developers, and go, okay, well, you're worth 20 million. And you'd buy, everyone would get a nice little paycheck, and you'd get a really good job at Google or Facebook. And the designers were left there going, well, no one really cares about us. But that's changing. So again, like the value of a good designer now is maybe like 1 million or something like that. It's still not as hot as developers, but companies are being bought to build out their design teams. If you look at Facebook, most of the design team there are ex-agencies that they've bought. They bought another agency called Hot Studio, another company, a friend of mine. It's like a 30, 40 person design team. So design is becoming important. So really that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to leave you with 3 things. 3 things I think startups need to do, or at least we need to instill in startups. Realize that design adds business value, not just making things look pretty. To build a culture of design, both in your agencies and amongst your clients, so they value design. And hire the best designers you can afford as early as you can afford. And with that, I will say thank you very much.